Have you ever been scrolling online and just stumbled into an absolute train wreck? You know, a private argument that has just exploded into a full-blown public war for everyone to see. Well, it turns out that's not just random internet drama. There's a real psychological phenomenon behind it. And today, we're going to break down exactly why it happens and take a look at why the law is having such a hard time catching up.
So what is it? Why do we take our most personal conflicts and just broadcast them? It's really not just about someone losing their temper. It goes deeper than that. What you're often seeing is a very calculated, even if it's subconscious, move to seize power. And to really get it, we need to look at the powerful emotions that are driving the whole thing.
All right, let's get into the psychology of it all, because to understand that big public explosion, you first have to understand the private pressure cooker that's been building up steam for maybe a long time. It all comes back to a core concept that honestly explains so much about how we act when we feel completely and utterly powerless.
And that concept is called displaced aggression. A researcher, Dr. Pontus Leander, really nailed this down. The idea is simple. When you're frustrated, when some goal of yours is blocked, and you can't push back against the real source of that frustration, you find an easier target. And this isn't just about blowing off steam. It's a motivated, psychological act to try and get back some feeling of control in your life. You can pretty much break it down into 3 steps. First, there's victimization. You feel completely powerless against some person or situation. Then comes the cognitive processing part. This is where you just stew on it. You ruminate. You replay the anger over and over. You start planning revenge. And finally, displacement. You find a safer, less threatening target and you unleash everything on them.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this look like in the real world, online? Let's walk through a case study that shows this psychological pathway in perfect and kind of painful detail. This is the story of how a private relationship issue was very strategically turned into a public execution.
So meet our subject. We'll call her Cybergirl 10. And she is under an immense amount of stress. She's got a lawyer who's basically ghosted her for 4 months. She's dealing with an ex-husband who is pushing her into a terrible divorce settlement. She feels this profound sense of powerlessness against these big, immovable forces in her life. She is a pressure cooker ready to blow.
And then, the moment of displacement arrives. In the middle of a live, public online event hosted by her own fiancé, Alberto, she launches an ambush. He tries to de-escalate, to handle it privately, but she's having none of it. She publicly demands, "Call me now." It's this raw, public power play designed to humiliate him and force his hand.
Now this is what makes it all so clear. Look at the difference in how she handles her conflicts. With her lawyer and her ex-husband, the actual sources of her stress, she's professional. She sends formal emails, she uses legal channels. But with Alberto, her fiancé, the person who is supposed to be her closest ally, she goes nuclear in the most public way possible. It was a choice. A strategic choice to inflict maximum damage on the safest target.
And in the middle of this public attack, she crosses a line that you just can't come back from. She drags an 11-year-old child's private custody details into this public spectacle. She literally weaponizes a child's private life to score points in her fight. In that moment, any moral high ground she might have had just completely evaporates.
And you know a major line was crossed because someone else on the live stream immediately jumped in to stop it. The co-host, Cindy, just says, "Let's drop it. I heard a kid involved." You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from everyone listening. It was outside validation that this had gone way too far.
So we've seen the psychological breakdown, the public ambush, the collateral damage. But what happens after the digital dust settles? What can a victim like Alberto actually do? This brings us to the legal side of things. And, well, it turns out our justice system has a pretty imperfect toolkit for dealing with these kinds of modern attacks.
If you're the victim of something like this, you basically have a few legal avenues, but each one is tricky. You've got defamation, but that requires proving someone made a false statement of fact. You have harassment, but that usually requires a repeated pattern of behavior. And then there's something called IIED, which sounds promising, but has its own massive hurdles.
Now, IIED stands for Intentional Infliction of Emotional Distress. And on the surface, it seems perfect for a case like this, right? A public ambush designed to cause maximum emotional pain. That should be a slam dunk. But the problem is, the legal standard for IIED is incredibly high. It's designed to be that way, to filter out cases that aren't, well, extreme.
And I mean, listen to this language. To win an IED claim, the conduct can't just be insulting or hurtful. It has to be considered beyond all bounds of normal human decency and intolerable in a civilized society. That is a ridiculously high bar to clear, and it leaves this huge gap where real, calculated emotional harm can happen with absolutely no legal consequences.
But okay, let's say a victim actually finds a legal claim that fits. Even then, the fight is just beginning, because the borderless nature of the internet itself creates these huge, systematic problems that can make getting any kind of justice a nightmare.
I mean, think about it. The internet has no borders, but our courts do. So you run into what's called jurisdictional chaos. Where do you even file a lawsuit? Then you have to prove the court has power over the defendant, that they purposefully directed their actions at your state. And on top of all of that, you have the First Amendment, which rightly protects free speech, creating this constant balancing act. It is a legal minefield.
And here is the really brutal truth about the system. All of these complexities, all this legal friction, it can be weaponized. A defendant can use these procedural hurdles to drag a case out for years, filing motion after motion, basically trying to make it so expensive and so exhausting that the victim just gives up. It becomes a war of attrition, one that many victims simply can't afford to win.
So that leaves us with a really tough question. In this age of constant digital conflict, how can our legal system possibly adapt? How do we find a way to address real, targeted emotional harm, the kind that can ruin lives, without accidentally stepping on our fundamental rights to free speech? There's no easy answer, but it's a conversation we absolutely need to be having.